This is data from OkCupid. See how women rate men compared to how men rate women on these dating sites. Now, generally, you can see that men are fairly evenly split between all sorts of categories. But what the women's one means is that they reckon about 80% of men are below average in attractiveness, which obviously can't be true. That's not how averages work. And so it essentially means that online dating at OkCupid, at the very least, but let's be fair, this is probably something that expands to the sort of wider dating realm, means that essentially women's standards have become very, very high, a lot higher than men's standards, and they've become very, very discerning. Now, this may... Who knows what the reason for this is? Now, I mean, you could argue that, well, it's possibly because women generally tend to be the ones who control whether a relationship happens and therefore whether sex happens. It's entirely possible that's the case. Maybe I could have done some research into it to find more data on that, but I don't think I need to for the purposes of this video, because for this video, it's just enough that this is. Why women are like this isn't really that important. But I think that it does go some way to explaining the phenomenon of the incel, men who in previous eras would probably have been able to find wives and girlfriends because social standards were different, circumstances have changed, women's opinions were different, I imagine. And now we're in the era of social media and online dating, and it seems that a lot of men are really starting to fall behind in that regard. If you happen to be one of those men, my advice to you, and I know you're not going to like it, my advice to you is ignore dating. Stop trying. Because like with Charlize Theron being 43 years old with two kids that she's adopted and unable to find a date demanding that men should step up, what this means is that you look desperate. And looking desperate is the most unattractive thing anyone can do at all. Looking desperate it just shows you don't value yourself very highly. Now, I understand that if you're someone who identifies as an incel, or you just have trouble getting dates and whatnot, that it becomes a kind of like self-reinforcing pattern that you become kind of obsessed with it. But it doesn't help you to get more dates if you become obsessed with it. If anything, I think women especially, but also men, can smell desperation a mile away, and it's a massive turn-off. So don't do that. What you need to do is something else, and that means literally anything. Start building something, start working out, start playing games and having a good time, just relax and enjoy yourself, doing something that makes you happy. Because spiraling further and further and further down into this, I'm not attractive, why am I not attractive, desperate, trying to get dates, it's a downward spiral that will make you bitter and resentful, and it won't ever produce the results that you want. Doing something else quite possibly could. Women tend to be attracted to men who build things, as in, anything. It doesn't have to be anything amazing, but if you've got a project that you work on, it shows that you're sort of upwardly mobile and forward and you're going somewhere, and women tend to be more attracted to that than men who just sit there stewing about why they don't get dates. I know that's not exactly what you want to hear, and I'm not saying necessarily build yourself up, but build something. Even if it is yourself, though, that's a start. And again, even if you're not the best looking guy in the world, drop your standards a bit, work out a bit, you can still do okay. But either way, the point of this video wasn't for me to just give out advice to incels that they don't want to hear, but they do need to hear, unfortunately. But again, don't worry about attractiveness, just start building something. Build a business, build a hobby, build something, right? Either way, the appropriate thing to do is, and if this was the reverse, if it was women who were just, men were just like, all of these women are fucking ugly, I'm not dating any of these, I'm only going to date hotties because I can or whatever, I would, I would have different advice for women. But either way, I wouldn't find it funny. I wouldn't be like, that's hilarious that women are failing to form relationships and get husbands. I mean, like, the thing with Charlize Theron, it's one of those things where it's like, it's kind of sad, but it's also a life lesson to other women. Don't waste your youth being chasing after men or chasing after a career if you think that you're actually going to want to start a family at some point, because you'll be in the position of Charlize Theron, where she's a multi-millionaire, she's a really unbelievably good-looking woman, and she can't get a goddamn date, and she has to go to the media demanding men step up and grow a pair to date her, which again just stinks of desperation and is completely unattractive. But that's not, I don't want to take a massive shit on Charlize Theron, but for some reason, the Mary Sue, a feminist rag, is the most generous way I could describe it. Dan Van Winkle, I'm sure a man who's getting loads and loads of tail. Unintentionally hilarious chart shows young men having way less sex, women not so much. So I guess this comes back to sort of Jordan Peterson's 80% of people, or 20% of people do 80% of the work, right? This kind of, I can't remember the actual name of the damn thing now that I'm recording this. But it just goes to show that there are more men who are monopolizing more women than before. And I'm not making a moral judgment on that. That's just what's happening. It's not whether it's good or bad. I mean, obviously, it's probably not a good thing that that's happening, but this seems to be the case. Young men driving the decline in sex. The share of men and women between the ages of 18 and 30 reporting no sex in the past. So in 1989, it was about 15% for both men and women. This dropped in 1990, the mid-90s, which is entirely congruent with my sort of social experience in the mid-90s. It was a much more liberal decade. People weren't so hung up on things. And then by 2018, it's on 18% for women. So it hasn't really changed all that much. It's like 2% up for women. But for men, it's gone up to 28%. That's a huge number. When almost a third of men are just unable to find partners, I think that socially we have to start considering what can be done about that. Because, I mean, it's not like we're going to find ourselves with less incel terrorists if we just mock this. I think that mocking people for this is going to further reinforce them in their beliefs that, everyone's against us, so fuck the world. We're gonna come at them hard. And I don't want to see that. I mean, everything that I propose is always in an attempt to mitigate the extremities. I think that, pulling everything back to the center is what is desperately needed at the moment. The extremities are really driving the conversation at the moment. And I think that's a really bad idea. And I think it is incumbent on centrist liberal types like myself to be able to tackle the tough subjects. And this is one of them. This is a tough subject because it speaks to some of the really sort of the core aspects of what makes a civilization a civilization. The relationships between men and women are fundamental to their ability to reproduce. And their ability to reproduce is what keeps a civilization going. So if we can't address this, then we're probably going to find that this causes greater problems in the future. Even if it's uncomfortable to say, well, look, ladies, you might have to start being more responsible with the way that you conduct your lives, at least in your youth. I imagine that people grow more responsible as they age. But it's also, like with the Charlize Theron thing, this has knock-on effects for you when you're older. I mean, this is obviously between 18 and 30. It's all well and good. I wonder what women's sex lives look like when they're single and in their 40s and 50s. Probably not amazing, are they? Let's be honest. And that's when women seem to want sex the most, isn't it? So, just saying, all things have consequences, and it might be worth us actually addressing these things. But obviously, the feminist perspective on this is malicious. It is one of vengeance. It is one of, ha ha ha, this is revenge, and therefore when men are suffering in this way, and I do believe that these men are suffering in this regard, this is an unintentionally hilarious chart because men's suffering is funny because from the feminist perspective, all through history, men have oppressed women and this is revenge. Because that's what victim politics is about. That's what all identity politics is, the politics of victimhood. And so all identity politics is about taking revenge on the group that wronged you. Even though these men may be absolutely lovely, fine, upstanding citizens, if for some reason they can't get dates, then they're going to be laughed at for being the oppressors of women, even though there's no real reason to think they are oppressing women, unless you're a radical feminist and you view everything in the group power dynamics, the politicization of individuals along arbitrary characteristics, such as gender, which is arbitrary. And this means that men in general are a negative force against women in general, because now it's a competition between men and women, whereas for all of human history, it wasn't that. It was a competition between the family and the world, because the world's a tough place and always has been, at least before modern times, before the first world came into existence. Anyway, let's have a look at the Mary Sue's opinion on why it's so funny that young men are failing. Today, the Washington Post shared an article entitled "The Share of Americans Not Having Sex Has Reached a Record High," analysing the many different reasons why Americans have been feeling less sexy than usual lately. However, the part that caught our eye was one of the charts that the author of the article shared on Twitter, and the collective reaction to it. As you can see above, the chart details that men between the ages of 18 and 30 are having a lot less sex than those in that age range from years before, and a steep decline that's been going on for about 10 years. I'm sure that's interesting for all kinds of reasons that Ingram explains in the article, but there's one particular detail about the chart that jumped out at us that may have a deeper meaning to it. Women aren't having nearly the same problem. Why, the people, the men anyway, ask why? The article offers a few suggestions for why men are having a problem or women haven't, including a high percentage of men in that age range that live with their parents. Labour force participation among men has fallen, which generally correlates to less stable relationships. Yes, women like providers. That's basically what you're saying. They're like, and this is what I was saying, they're like independent men who can sustain themselves and therefore will be able to sustain them as well. That's the way women tend to view relationships. They want to marry up. And someone like Charlize Theron, I mean, like really, Charlize Theron would have no problem whatsoever getting a man if she were to go to like a council estate or something. She would have absolutely no problem. She'd get one in the same day. But because women have a natural a tendency to marry up and want men of more impressive status than themselves, well, good luck, Charlize Theron. You're at the top of the very top of the pyramid. You're unbelievably attractive. You're unbelievably rich. You're world famous. Good luck finding a guy who's with more status than you, who also will take on your poorly chosen life circumstances. Anyway, somehow amidst all the theorizing, so by the way, the Mary Sue this is all fine. They've literally just laid out why men are failing in society. And I imagine that men failing somehow correlates and is a causal correlation with men acting out in very negative ways, not just like the extreme like Elliot Rodger types, in other ways as well. But okay, it doesn't matter. Fuck men, obviously. It's the feminist opinion is just fuck men. That's all very good and insightful and data-driven, but something literally isn't adding up. Sex, the kind of the article is talking about, takes at least two people. Yes, well, obviously, more women are having sex with a smaller number of men, because men are prone to have sex with lots of women because generally they're not the ones in control of when they have sex. And if women are responding or going to like a smaller percentage of men, well, then these men are doing great, but the rest of them, that's not good, is it? Somehow, amid all the theorizing, and honestly, right, that kind of validates what the MGTOW and pickup artists are saying, to be honest. This is data that is validating their worldview, that women are effectively being irresponsible in this regard. And if you consider them to have any kind of social responsibility at all, then maybe they are. You know, maybe they actually are. Who knows? Somehow miss all the theorizing. Never once does the subject come up with who are these women having sex with instead. Well, we already know. We already know. We're no experts, but the answer to the question may just explain the men's problem. Women just don't want to have sex with them. That's not true. Women want to have sex with men. They just have sex with a smaller pool of men because it's about accessibility. Whether it's because a small number of not terrible men are skewing things by having disproportionate amount of sex. Now, you can sit there and assume that the men that the women are having sex with are not terrible men, but I absolutely guarantee you that if you were to ask any of these men what they thought about feminism, the men who are being particularly sexually successful, oh, they're not fans. It isn't the beta fucking orbiters, the male feminists, who are getting all of this sex, you delusional lunatics. It is the men who absolutely reject feminism, and obviously who have natural gifts that allow them to be successful with women that are getting this. There is absolutely no way that you would describe these men as not terrible. If you were to meet any of them, You would say, oh, that's toxic masculinity right there. Because women love toxic masculinity. They find it very attractive generally. And I realise there are going to be feminists who go like, I don't find toxic masculinity attractive. Well, good for you, love. Most women do. Well, look at a fucking romance novel, for Christ's sake. Look at the sales of 50 Shades of Grey and all this, the classic cases. Like, and then the men in those are quintessentially the examples of toxic masculinity. I mean, it's not something you have to work very hard to work out. But anyway, the not terrible men, quote unquote, are skewing things by having a disproportionate amount of sex, or more women having sex with each other instead, or more likely both. For most of the men out there, she's just not that into you. No shit. Even if the answer is that they're just having more sex with men out of that age range, that's not a great commentary on men ages 18-30. Well, either way, it's a problem, isn't it? You know, but it's not unintentionally hilarious. It's sad. It's the sign of a civilization that's having problems that it doesn't understand and that needs to solve. But in not unrelated news, he also tweeted he did ask a source whether there could be a Me Too effect in play, but the verdict was not that the no-sex trend predates that, which it does, although the movement itself isn't a result of years of men being terrible to women, getting progressively more fed up with it. No, the Me Too movement is about Hollywood executives and folks like that taking ugly men who would otherwise, if they weren't rich, famous and powerful, would otherwise have absolutely no standing with women whatsoever and no pull with them whatsoever, and using this wealth and power to make women do things, to coerce women into doing things they otherwise wouldn't have wanted to do. So no, don't give me that nonsense, right? But the interesting thing was the comments here. There's some specious conclusions. There was I'm going to go through this huge thread where people... so incels have a point, and I'm not sure if that's amazing or not yet. Well, it's not. I mean, what's amazing about it? They do apparently have a point. This is what they've been talking about. And I say this as a married man. This is not my problem. This is a problem for other people, but I am still concerned about this because it's speaking to the health of our civilization writ large. Just like, and these are the most fundamental building blocks of civilization that we're messing with here as well. I mean, I'm just saying we could have been more careful, right? This might have been an inevitable consequence. But personally, I think it's because that demographic is largely socially awful. Well, it means what you mean. It depends what you mean by socially awful. Are they a bit more awkward? Maybe. You mean, are they less attractive? Sure. You know, but does that make them awful, or does that just make them unfortunate? But it's things like this that are just totally pointless. Incels have the wrong point. They are violent misogynists. No, they're not. I mean, they're misogynist in a lot of ways, absolutely. A lot of them are just deeply resentful against women because they can't get a relationship. And I'm just saying, there but for the grace of God, to be honest. Like, it's easy when you're a woman to say, well, you're just horrible misogynists. But I mean, and it's easy for someone who's married to say something similar. But man, if it were you, that would be a pretty rough position to be in, right? Maybe a bit of empathy might be useful at this point. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm an evil misogynist myself, apparently, but maybe a little bit of empathy could go a long way. But they claim the problem is feminism, and not that they're objectively terrible. You don't know who you're talking about. You don't know any of these people. You don't know what they do with their lives, but you do know that they can't get a date. That's it. You don't know why. You don't know what the situation is. You're just saying, I don't like incels because you have a construct of incels in your head that I don't think represents reality. Because, I mean, you call them violent misogynists. I don't think the average incel is manly enough to be violent. Look at Elliot Rodger. Like, he was a scrawny little fucking pretty boy. Like, it was before the shooting rampage. How much violence do you think he had done? Probably not very much, because he would have got his fucking shit kicked in by any man around him. And probably by most of the women that he would have tried physically to attack. But when he's got guns and stuff, it's totally different. But anyway, they are not just violent misogynists. What they are lonely and exiled men who realise that they aren't getting something that most people expect to be able to achieve. And I'm not saying that women have to do X. I'm saying that we really have to start thinking about these things carefully and considering our effect on the less fortunate and less powerful in society. Because I know that feminism and feminists would like to portray women as the helpless victims of men and society at large, but they are not. Women are very powerful. They always have been. They've always had a lot of influence in society, and they've always been very, very powerful when it comes to the dating game. So don't give me this bullshit and get off your high horses.